Imagine a man so strong that he could use only his bare hands to tear apart a lion, destroy an army with only a donkey's jawbone, and collapse a huge temple with his sheer might. Samson was not only a man of unparalleled physical strength, he was also a man selected by God, created to save Israel from its enemies. His story is not only one of victory, though. It is also one of human frailty, treachery, and, in the end, redemption. The amazing life of Samson, the strongest man ever recorded in the Bible, will be explored in today's video. We'll learn how he became so strong, what brave deeds made him a legend, and the risky decisions that ultimately brought him to ruin. How could a man who had been given so much by God become tempted and betrayed? What does his supreme sacrifice tell us about the grace and mercy of God? In Samson's story, there are contrasts between strength and vulnerability, success and failure, and obedience and disobedience. It's ultimately a tale that illustrates God's steadfast faithfulness despite our mistakes. What lessons, therefore, can we, as contemporary Christians, learn from this historical powerhouse's rise and fall? Might we be able to avoid our spiritual problems by learning from his life? Stay tuned, as this tale will not only encourage you, but also prompt you to consider your relationship with God. Discover how Samson's story resonates with us today as we examine his remarkable life. Now, let's get started. The narrative of Samson starts when the Israelites are going through a lot of upheaval. According to the book of Judges, a nation was repeatedly at odds with the Philistines, who had conquered them as a result of their disobedience to God. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. According to Judges 13 verse 1 NIV. The angel of the Lord, a messenger who brought news that would alter both their lives and Israel's destiny, paid Manoah, a member of the tribe of Dan, and his infertile wife an extraordinary visit during this period. The angel told Manoah's wife that she would become pregnant and give birth to a boy who would start the process of rescuing Israel from the Philistines. Being a Nazirite from birth, this child was to be unique and dedicated to God. In the book of Judges, the angel said, giving precise directions. Judges 13 verses 4 to 5 NIV. For now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. 5. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Manoah sought earnestly for wisdom on how to raise the child after learning of this remarkable promise. His plea was heard, and the Lord's angel came back. The angel said, "Why do you ask my name?" when Manoah asked him for his name this time. It is incomprehensible. Judges 13 verse 18 NIV. This response's enigmatic quality emphasizes the messenger's divine origin. The angel touched the burnt offering that Manoah had prepared with his staff as the flames rose, causing it to be consumed by the fire before rising to heaven in the flames. Manoah was so amazed and terrified by this astounding show that he cried out, "We are bound to die. God has been seen by us." NIV, Judges 13 verse 22. His wife, however, gave him wise and faith-filled reassurance, emphasizing that God's purpose was to fulfill his promise rather than to hurt them. According to her, the Lord would not have accepted a burnt offering and grain offering from our hands, nor would he have shown us all these things or now told us this if he had meant to kill us. Judges 13 verse 23 NIV. The promise was eventually kept, and Samson was born. His parents nurtured him for the lofty purpose God planned for his life, following the angel's instructions. Samson's birth tale serves as a potent reminder of God's omnipotence and faithfulness. God had a plan for deliverance even as judgment was taking place. The faith of Manoah and his wife, who believed in God's promise even when it appeared unfathomable, can serve as an example for Christians today. Their deference to and obedience to God's commands teach us the value of living by his will, regardless of how difficult or uncertain the road may appear. Last but not least, The remarkable circumstances surrounding Samson's birth demonstrate God's ability to use regular individuals to accomplish great goals. Despite being ordinary people going through a very trying time, God selected Manoah and his wife to be crucial to his plan of redemption. This inspires us to stay obedient, believing that God can utilize anybody who is prepared to give their all for him. Motivated by curiosity and fate, Samson left the familiar hills of his Israelite homeland as a young man and entered the cities of Philistia. He met a Philistine woman from Timnah there, and he was so taken by the beauty that he chose to marry her in defiance of his parents' disapproval. Despite his parents' reminders that it is crucial to marry inside Israel's covenant community, Samson persisted and declared his love for her. Unbeknownst to him, what appeared to be disobedience was a component of God's larger plan. According to Judges 14 verse 4, NIV. Judges 14 verse 4 NIV. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. The first of Samson's numerous displays of God-given strength occurred when he was traveling to Timnah to set up the marriage. A lion attacked him while he was traveling, but Samson, who was filled with the Spirit of the Lord, used his bare hands to tear the animal apart. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands as he might have torn a young goat, according to Judges 14 verse 6 NIV. However, he kept his actions a secret from both his mother and father. Even though Samson decided to keep this amazing achievement a secret, this encounter brought to light the heavenly strength and purpose that characterized his life. Later, while Samson was returning to Timnah for his wedding, he happened to walk by the lion's carcass and saw that a swarm of bees had produced honey inside of it. He took a spoonful of honey, consumed it, and even gave it to his parents without explaining where it came from. Despite its seeming innocence, this conduct was against the Nazirite vow, which prohibited coming into contact with anything filthy or unclean, including dead bodies. It also foreshadowed the conflict in Samson's life between his heavenly mission and human frailty by symbolizing how God might create pleasure and sustenance even out of death and ruin. Based on his own experience with the lion and the honey, Samson came up with a riddle for the wedding feast. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Judges 14 verse 14, NIV, was the challenge he put to the 30 Philistine groomsmen. Since only Samson had witnessed the events, no one else could solve the puzzle. The stakes were high. Samson promised the groomsmen 30 sets of exquisite linen and clothing if they were able to solve the riddle. They owed him the same if they failed. The Philistines were enraged by the riddle and, in a desperate attempt to win, turned to trickery and threats, saying, "Coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death." They confronted Samson's new bride and threatened to kill her. Judges 14 verse 15, NIV. Terrified, she begged Samson repeatedly, breaking his determination with her tears. Samson finally gave in and gave her the solution, which she subsequently gave to the groomsmen. Samson recognized instantly what had transpired as the groomsmen triumphantly offered the solution. He defeated 30 Philistines in a show of wrath and heavenly power, stealing their clothing to settle his obligation. Judges 14 verse 19 NIV. Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of everything, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, he returned to his father's home. This was the start of a string of increasingly intense battles between Samson and the Philistines, motivated by both personal revenge and divine purpose. Christians learn many valuable lessons from Samson's story, especially his meeting with the lion and the riddle. It first shows how God can accomplish his goals through imperfect people. Even though Samson didn't always follow God's rules, God nonetheless used him to fight Israel's foes. Romans 8 verse 28 NIV states, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." This reminds believers of that verse. Second, The significance of fidelity and integrity in carrying out one's calling is shown by Samson's struggle with obedience. His readiness to divulge the answer to his riddle demonstrates how emotional strain can result in concessions that undermine our divinely mandated mission. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it, says Proverbs 4 verse 23 NIV, reminding Christians today to guard their hearts and stick to their promises. After Samson gets married, his narrative takes a tragic and dramatic turn. The family of Samson's Philistine bride makes the startling choice to marry one of Samson's groomsmen after the betrayal at his bridal feast. Unaware of this, Samson subsequently visits his wife in Timnah, only to encounter a tragic turn of events. In addition to denying him access to her, her father ruthlessly offers her younger sister her place. Samson's rage is evident, and his answer is nothing short of remarkable, displaying his well-known strength and guile. Samson punishes the foxes by capturing 300 of them, tying them together by their tails, and affixing a flaming fire to each pair. The Philistines' crops, vineyards, and olive trees are destroyed when he lets the foxes roam the fields. The event is described in Judges 15 verse 5 NIV. Judges 15 verse 5 NIV. Lit the torches and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the shocks and standing grain, together with the vineyards and olive groves. This destructive act of sabotage sets off a vicious cycle of retaliation between Samson and the Philistines, intensifying their hostility to unprecedented levels. The Philistines react with ruthless retaliation when they learn that Samson's behavior was spurred by the way his wife's family treated him. They murder Samson's wife and her father by burning them alive in a terrible act of retaliation. Samson's determination to retaliate is strengthened by the sadness and unfairness of this event. Samson's vow of vengeance is recorded in Judges 15 verse 7. NIV, since you've acted like this, I swear that I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. Samson kills a large number of Philistines in revenge, saying, I have done to them what they did to me. Judges 15 verse 11 NIV. To escape the escalating fighting, Samson then withdraws to a cave in the rock of Etam. Outraged by his behavior, the Philistines march on the tribe of Judah and demand that they turn Samson up. The men of Judah submit their requests out of dread of the Philistines' retaliation. Their justification is explained in Judges 15 verse 11. NIV, are you unaware that the Philistines rule over us? How have you treated us? However, Samson consents to being tied and taken to the Philistines in exchange for his people not killing him. Samson is brought before the Philistine army while bound by 2 additional cords. However, the story is far from over. The Spirit of the Lord descends heavily upon him as the Philistines get closer, and he separates from the bonds as though they were only threads. Using a donkey's jawbone as a weapon, Samson defeats 1,000 Philistines in a moment of heavenly empowerment. Judges 15 verses 15 to 16 NIV. 15. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. 16. Then Samson said, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men. This amazing accomplishment highlights the superhuman strength that God gave Samson, allowing him to free Israel from its captors. It also demonstrates Samson's tenacity and resourcefulness over insurmountable obstacles. But the cycle of violence and retaliation that characterizes his life also serves as a warning about the destructive force of unbridled rage and reprisal. There are many important lessons for contemporary Christians to be learned from Samson's revenge saga and his conflicts with the Philistines. It first illustrates the perils of allowing rage and retaliation to rule one's emotions. Even though God used Samson to fight the Philistines, his acts were frequently motivated more by personal grudges than by a desire to carry out God's purpose. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun set while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold, warns Ephesians 4 verses 26 to 27, NIV. Second, the story emphasizes how crucial it is to have faith in God's plan despite injustice and betrayal. Samson's story serves as a reminder to Christians that God's intentions will ultimately triumph despite human emotions getting in the way. His goals are bigger than our comprehension. Lastly, the significance of seeking God's strength during difficult times is highlighted by Samson's dependence on the Spirit of the Lord for his victories. Christians today, like Samson, must be empowered by God to overcome spiritual, emotional, and bodily challenges. Christians are encouraged by Philippians 4 verse 13, NIV, which states, "I can do all this through him who gives me strength." Samson's life demonstrates both the strength of God's provision and the dangers of human weakness. His narrative urges Christians to put all of their trust in God, avoid the destructive power of rage, and make an effort to live by God's higher will. When Samson visits Gaza, a Philistine stronghold, his story takes a tragic turn. He meets a prostitute there, demonstrating his increasing carelessness and disdain for the holy Nazirite vow that separated him from God's plan. Judges 16 verse 1, NIV. His adversaries set up an ambush while he was in Gaza to capture him at daybreak. However, God gives Samson great strength, which enables him to make a spectacular escape. But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night, according to Judges 16 verse 3, NIV. After that, he stood up and grabbed the city gate's doors and 2 pillars, tearing them off the bar and all. He carried them to the summit of the hill overlooking Hebron after hoisting them over his shoulders. In addition to showcasing Samson's physical prowess, this incredible feat portends the arrogance and impatience that would ultimately bring him to ruin. Following this incident, Samson's journey takes a more tragic turn when he meets Delilah, a woman from the Sorek Valley. In contrast to his previous exploits, Samson's relationship with Delilah is motivated more by his unbridled desires than by divine power. Despite his intense affection for her, the Philistine commanders perceive an opening. To find out the source of Samson's strength, they make Delilah an alluring offer: 1,100 pieces of silver from each leader. Judges 16 verse 5, NIV. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." Delilah's perseverance in figuring out Samson's power source is a reflection of the enemy's unrelenting plans. She repeatedly begs Samson to tell her his secret, but he consistently lies to her. At first, he informs her that if he is bound with 7 new bowstrings, he can be controlled. He asserts that if this doesn't work, he may be restrained with fresh ropes, and that if his hair were woven into a loom's fabric, his strength would be diminished. Every time Delilah puts his assertions to the test while he is asleep, Samson's power is shown to be unbeatable. Judges 16 verses 6 to 14, NIV. Because of his love, or maybe lust, for her, Samson keeps believing in Delilah despite her numerous betrayals. Eventually, Delilah's perseverance wears him down. The pivotal moment is encapsulated in Judges 16 verses 16 to 17. NIV, she badgered him day after day until he was tired of it. He then filled her in on everything. "I've been a Nazirite devoted to God since my mother's womb, so no razor has ever touched my head," he claimed. "I would lose my strength and become just as weak as any other man if my head were shaved." Samson's confession is a spiritual failing rather than merely a vulnerable moment. By disclosing the source of his power, he violates his sacred oath to God and puts his faith in someone who has previously proven to be unfaithful. Knowing Samson's secret, Delilah takes quick action. As a representation of his mistaken faith and spiritual blindness, she puts him to sleep on her lap. His power leaves him as he sleeps, and his hair is shaved. In Judges 16 verses 19 to 20, NIV, this crucial event is described. Judges 16 verses 19 to 20, NIV. 19, after putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. 20, then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Samson's downfall is both physical and spiritual. He loses his strength and is taken prisoner by the Philistines, who tie him in bronze and gouge out his eyes. He is brought to Gaza, where he once showed his divine abilities and was forced to labor in a jail as a grain grinder. A sobering reminder of the price of defiance and compromise. The once mighty judge of Israel is now degraded and helpless. More than just a personal failure, Samson's vulnerability before Delilah teaches a valuable spiritual lesson. The perils of arrogance, disobedience, and misguided trust are exposed by his downfall. As a Nazirite, Samson had been asked to pursue a life of devotion to God. However, he permitted the urges to take precedence over his divine intent. The necessity of protecting against spiritual compromise is one of the most important lessons for contemporary Christians. Long before he met Delilah, Samson was gradually turning to sin. The disobedience of his Nazirite vow, whether it is by visiting a prostitute, touching a dead lion, or hanging around with Philistines, is indicative of a pattern of minor concessions that ultimately brought about his catastrophic collapse. But every individual is tempted when they are drawn away by their malevolent desire and seduced, according to James 1 verses 14 to 15, NIV. Desire then gives birth to sin after it has conceived, and sin, when fully developed, gives birth to death. Samson's story also emphasizes how risky it is to depend more on oneself than on God. Throughout his life, Samson frequently overlooked the spiritual foundation of his strength in favor of using his physical prowess to overcome obstacles. God alone is the source of true strength, as his final failure serves as a reminder. Significantly, Samson's hair starts to grow back while he is being held captive, humiliated, and forced to grind grain in the Philistine jail. Judges 16 verse 22 NIV. This particular detail implies the possibility of Samson's recovery and serves as a subliminal reminder of God's unwavering love and kindness, even in the face of our failures. The Philistines' grand feast in honor of their deity, Dagon, is when Samson's story reaches its climax. The Philistine leaders, accompanied by over 3,000 men and women, congregate in a large temple to celebrate and make offerings because they think Dagon has given them control of their enemy. Samson, Judges 16 verses 23 to 24, NIV. They invite Samson to perform for them from the prison, and their delight is heightened by mocking. Judges 16 verses 25 to 26, NIV. 25. While they were in high spirits, they shouted, "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them, when they stood him among the pillars. 26. Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." Now weak and blind, Samson is guided to the temple's main pillars. He acknowledges that the Lord alone is the source of his strength and prays to God in this defenseless moment. His sincere request is encapsulated in Judges 16 verse 28. NIV. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. God, please give me strength again, so that I might avenge the Philistines from my 2 eyes with a single blow." God answers Samson's request by giving him the strength he had lost. With one hand on each of the temple's 2 major pillars, Samson braced himself against them. He pushes against them as hard as he can, and the temple falls. The dramatic conclusion is described in Judges 16 verse 30, NIV. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then, using all of his strength, he pushed, and the temple fell upon the rulers and everyone inside. As a result, he killed many more people after he passed away than during his lifetime. Samson's last deed fulfills his function as Israel's judge and serves as a moment of personal redemption. God used him to free Israel from their captors despite his shortcomings and failures throughout his life. Samson's family recovers his body from the debris following the temple's collapse and buries him in his father Manoah's tomb. Judges 16 verse 31, NIV. This stirring finale to Samson's tale serves as a reminder that God may use imperfect people to further his goals. For those who believe they have strayed too far from grace, it also offers hope by highlighting the significance of repentance and dependence on God's strength. As we conclude today's video, Let's not forget that Christians can learn numerous important lessons from Samson's tragic fall. It first emphasizes how important it is to be watchful to preserve spiritual integrity. Believers are called to live lives that are set apart for God, just like Samson did. However, compromise is easily brought about by the demands of the outside world and the temptation of sin. Second, Samson's tale highlights the value of responsibility and sage friendships. Samson was exposed to Delilah's deceit because of his loneliness and lack of responsibility. Staying accountable within a church community and surrounding oneself with wise counsel might help modern Christians avoid similar traps. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another, reminds us of Proverbs 27 verse 17, NIV. God's grace and redeeming power are demonstrated in Samson's life. Samson's story does not conclude in defeat, despite his shortcomings. His ultimate act of faith and subsequent redemption serve as a potent reminder that God can reach anybody. Christians can find solace in the understanding that God's grace is enough to renew and repair, even during times of weakness and failure. The story of Samson's fall and his involvement with Delilah is a warning and a source of inspiration. His narrative exhorts Christians to protect their spiritual integrity, have faith in God's omnipotence, and look for forgiveness when they fail. Most importantly, it serves as a reminder that despite human frailty, God's plan can nonetheless triumph. Do you believe Samson's downfall was inevitable, or could he have avoided it if he had made different choices? Which do you believe was Samson's biggest flaw, his pride, or his love for Delilah? Leave a comment below with your opinions. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate your time and hope to see you in the next video.